Alright, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to take a look at the Zendikar Rising Commander decks and give a brief overview of what the decks do so you can decide which deck best suits your playstyle. The purpose here is to give just a brief overview, give you an idea what the decks do, and you can check the description for the deck list. I will leave links to the deck list if you want to look over the entire things, but the idea is let's just get a quick look at them, see what they do, see which one is right for you. So the two decks are Land's Wrath and Sneak Attack. The first of which is a Naya Landfall deck, and the latter is a Dimir Rogues deck. So starting off with Land's Wrath, the commander is Obun Muldaya Ancestor. It's a 4 mana 3/3 that turns a land into an XX creature with haste and trample at the beginning of your combat phase, where X is Obun's power. So by default, it'll turn a land into a 3/3. So, 4 mana 3/3 turns a land into a 3/3. It's okay, but the Landfall ability says each time we play a land, we'll get a +1/+1 counter. So not only does Obun himself get more and more powerful as we trigger Landfall, but the elementals will also get bigger. If he becomes a 5/5, he makes a 5/5 land. So the idea here is pretty simple. This is a Landfall deck. We have some pretty sweet landfall cards in this thing, like Admonition Angel and Emiria Shepherd. The first will exile non-land permanents until it dies every time we play a land, and Emiria Shepherd will allow us to bring a ton of stuff back from graveyards. We also get a bunch of token producers like Emiria Angel, Rampaging Ballast, and Omnath Locus of Rage. The Angel creates 1/1 flyers, the Baloth a 4/4 beast, and Omnath creates 5/5 elementals every single time we play a land. So we can actually go super wide if we can get a couple of these in play. And we have more too. We have Spore Mound, we have Zendikar's Royal, we have tons of ways to produce tokens every time we play lands. Now, triggering landfall can be kind of difficult, because if we draw all of our landfall stuff, then we're not drawing lands, and if we're drawing lands, then we're not drawing landfall triggers. So we have a way around that with Living Twister and Mina and Din. With Living Twister, you can pay 1 to return a land to your hand, and you can return the land you tapped to pay for this ability. Basically, you tap a forest, you activate this ability, then you return that same forest to your hand, and then you replay it to trigger landfall. So it's basically a free landfall trigger every single turn. So if we have any of these token producers, it's going to produce a token for every creature we have every time, right? If we have Baloth in, we basically get a free beast every turn. Mina and Din allow us to pay 2 to return a land to our hand, so it's a little bit more expensive, but they also allow us to play multiple lands per turn. We can play an additional land, so even though it costs 2 to return a land, we get to play 2 lands per turn, so we can activate it twice, meaning we get 2 landfall triggers per turn. If we have Mina and Din in play, we can pay 4, return 2 of the lands we tapped, replay them untapped, and get 2 landfall triggers. So what we have here are repeatable ways to constantly get landfall triggers. Similarly, the deck has Multani, which will have power and toughness equal to the number of lands we control, and in your graveyard, by the way, not just lands you control, but lands in your graveyard, and it also allows us to return lands to our hand to re-trigger landfall abilities. In this case, it has to be in our graveyard, but if it's in our graveyard, we can return 2 lands to our hand, return this, and get multiple landfall triggers. And another way to trigger landfall is with ramp, and this deck has a ton of ramp. There is so much ramp in this deck, and this is important because not only does it allow us to ramp into all of our big stuff, but then after we have all of our big stuff in play, it allows us to trigger landfall multiple times. Like if we have a land and we play it, we trigger landfall, and then we play one of these and we get more landfall triggers when those lands come into play. So ramp allows us to both get up to big enough mana to play, the Baloth and Omnath and whatnot, but then afterwards it's going to let us trigger those things multiple times per turn. And one of the best mana ramp cards in my opinion is Beanstalk Giant, which technically isn't the best ramp spell. It's 3 mana, get 1 land, not great technically, but then we can play it as a game-ending threat because it has power and toughness equal to the number of lands we control. So we have Multani, which has power and toughness equal to the number of lands we control and the number in our graveyard. We have Beanstalk Giant. Both of these work with our strategy, right? The Beanstalk Giant helps trigger landfall by searching for a land. Multani helps trigger landfall by returning lands, and they're also just both game-ending threats. And that kind of gives you just a rough idea what's going on with this deck. There's more landfall payoffs in the deck. There are more ways to find lands. We have plenty of removal. We have board sweepers. We have a few ways to draw cards. Heck, there's a minor +1/+1 counter sub-theme that I didn't even talk about. Remember Oboon puts +1/+1 counters on things with his landfall trigger, so we actually have all kinds of things we can do with that. But generally speaking, you're going to be playing lands, you're going to be replaying lands, you're going to be searching for lands, you're going to be ramping with lands, you're going to be playing those lands, you're going to be triggering stuff. Those triggers are going to give you creature tokens, they're going to give you ways to reanimate stuff, they're going to give you control over the board. Basically, you're playing lands, you're getting advantage out of that, you're creating massive boards, you're creating massive creatures, and you're basically looking to smash face by getting lots of lands. That's the general idea. That is the Land's Wrath deck. Next up is Sneak Attack, and earlier I said this was a Tribal Rogues deck, which was true, but it's not just a Tribal Rogue deck, it's also a mill deck. I know it's crazy, but it is a mill deck. So the commander is Anawan the Ruin Thief, who gives rogues +1/+1, which gives you, an example of the rogue theme. This is a rogue deck, the commander gives rogues +1/+1. However, he also says that whenever a rogue deals damage to a player, we mill them based on the amount of damage dealt, and then we get to draw a card if we mill a creature. So if we deal 3 damage, we mill 3, and if there's a creature in there, we get to draw a card. So we care about attacking, we care about dealing damage to opponents, we care about milling, and we are looking to draw a lot of cards with this deck. So naturally, we do have Tribal Rogues, we have things like Frog Tosser Banneret, Una's Blackguard, Stink Drinker Bandit. The Banneret will reduce the cost of our rogues, the Blackguard will put +1/+1 counters on rogues as we play them, and the Bandit will give our rogues a huge power boost. If they go on block, they get +2/+1, which is actually kind of a lot. And this might not seem like much, right? Because we have some rogue tribal, but what makes this so powerful is we have tons of unblockable rogues. Things like Invisible Stalker, Slitherblade, and Triton's Shore Stalker. So that's 3 unblockable rogues. So that's pretty great, right? 3 unblockable rogues. That's a lot of unblockable creatures. I'm sure you agree, but you're wrong. It's not enough unblockable creatures. So we also have Changeling Outcast. We also have Meringue River Prowler. We also have Whirler Rogue, which are all basically unblockable. The Outcast is a rogue because it's a changeling. The Prowler is unblockable, and Whirler Rogue can become unblockable if we tap 2 untapped artifacts and it produces 2 Thopter tokens. So basically unblockable. And that doesn't even count flying rogues, right? There are lots of fairy rogues with flying, so not technically unblockable, but unblockable enough. So we have all of these super evasive rogues, and our commander pumps them up. The bandit is insane, giving them +2/+1 when they go unblocked, and most of the time they're going to go unblocked. So we can actually push a ton of damage, and while we're doing that, remember, our commander is going to be milling our opponent and letting us draw cards. So you can kind of see what we're doing, right? It's called Sneak Attack. We have these really sneaky, difficult to block rogues that get pumped up and mill and draw. But so far, this seems a little bit underwhelming, right? Like, this seems like a pretty good strategy for a non-commander. Like a 1v1 deck, that seems perfectly fine because you only have one opponent, but is that really going to work in a big commander game? Seems a little bit underwhelming, but the best part about these unblockable rogues is they're really good at wielding equipment. Things like Scythe Claw, Black Blade Reforged, and Whisper Steel Dagger, and apologies for the blurry image of the dagger as well as the commanders. If you haven't seen my why some cards appear blurry, these are the only images available online at the moment. But anyway, the Scythe Claw says when the equipped creature deals damage to a player, they lose half their life total. So now we're talking. This seems much more commander playable. Scythe Claw will turn your little 1/1 unblockable rogue into a terrifying menace on the battlefield. If it's early enough in the game, or if someone just hasn't been attacked yet, this thing can basically deal 20 damage to someone, essentially close to that. It's gonna do a lot of damage. And then the Black Blade will give those unblockable creatures +1/+1 for each land we control. So late in the game, that's insane. We have, 7 lands, and it turns our 1/1 unblockable into an 8/8 unblockable creature. Pretty decent. And the dagger says whenever the equipped creature deals damage to a player, we get to cast stuff from their graveyard. So we are milling. Remember, don't forget that we are milling. So we put this on an unblockable rogue. It mills, it draws a card if we hit a creature, and also if we hit a creature, the dagger can cast it. But the craziest piece of equipment has to be the Bone Horde. So it gives a creature +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures in graveyards. That might not seem like much, but remember, we're milling and it's commander, so graveyard's gonna be big. So let's just say, to use a somewhat small number in a commander game, let's just say there are 7 creatures in the graveyard. Not a whole lot. That makes our 1/1 unblockable and 8/8 unblockable, technically a 9/9 unblockable creature if we have our commander. So it's gonna hit for 9, unblockable, mill 9 cards, And let's say we just hit four creatures. 4 creatures out of 9 cards. That seems reasonable. Not only will we draw a card from our commander, but that makes the Bone Horde more powerful. Next turn we're hitting with a 13/13 unblockable, meaning it's going to deal 13 damage. It's going to mill 13 cards. At that point, we're definitely drawing a card. How many do we hit there? Maybe we hit 5 to 7 creatures. At that point, it's a 20/20. It's going to deal 20 damage. It's going to mill 20 cards. You get the idea, right? Like, this thing just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it hits. It mills more and more cards. You know, we get to draw cards. It's crazy. We also have the Hexproof Rogue that would love to wear this thing. And if all of that doesn't seem powerful enough, it also has Sir Conrad. He basically says that anytime a creature enters or leaves the graveyard from anywhere, it's basically what it says, each opponent loses 1 life. So if we're milling all of these cards, Sir Conrad can just sort of combo kill. Not technically, it's not really a combo necessarily, but if we mill like 14 cards, not only are we dealing 14 damage, but everyone in the game is going to be taking a ton of damage. So that's basically what's happening with Bone Horde. Another way to capitalize on all this milling is with things like Consuming Aberration and Night Howler. Neither of these are rogues, but both will get more powerful as the graveyards fill from all the milling. Consuming Aberration also gives us an extra way to mill cards as an added bonus. So for our little unblockable rogues can't do it, then we get massive beatdown creatures. We also get a lot of reanimation spells. We get the primordial of the thing that I can't say its name and Rise from the Grave. And these are just 2 of them. We have many reanimation spells. So we're unblockable, we're milling, and then we have lots of reanimation. So that gives you a brief idea of what's going on. Much like the previous deck, there's lots of cool stuff that we didn't discuss here. We have tons of removal, we have tons of board sweepers, we have more milling cards like these, we have more mill payoffs, and we're actually drawing a ton of cards right from our commander. So we have things that care about drawing or help us draw. We're drawing a lot of cards with this deck. And I didn't even mention there's like Lazav's here, Gonti's here. There's lots of ways to steal people's permanents. There's lots of ways to copy people's permanents. There's lots of ways to reanimate people's permanents. So I think that gives you an idea. It's aptly named Sneak Attack. Sounds innocent enough, right? You sit down and you say, yeah, I'm just playing tribal rogues. Little do they know that in the shadowy crevices, why did I choose that word? In the shadowy shadows is a brutal mill strategy that no one will expect. So there you go. Those are the commander decks in Zendikar Rising. If you want the full deck list, as I said earlier, I will have them in the description below. Let me know which deck you're most excited for. And in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.